Well, they are close by here somewhere. Yes, there they are by that grey horse. Oh, that's his present young woman. Wife, did you say? Has he married again? I don't know. She's pretty, isn't she? Yes, nothing to complain of, or jump at. Not much to depend on, though, slim, fidgety little thing like that. He's a nice-looking chap, too. You ought to have stuck to him, Arabella. I don't know, but I ought, murmured she. Annie laughed. That's you, Arabella, always wanting another man than your own. Well, and what woman don't, I'd like to know. As for that body with him, she don't know what love is, at least what I call love. I can see in her face she don't. And perhaps, Abby dear, you don't know what she calls love. I'm sure I don't wish to. Ah, they're making for the art department. I should like to see some pictures myself. Suppose we go that way. Why, if all Wessex isn't here, I verily believe. There's Dr. Vilbert. Haven't seen him for years, and he's not looking a day older than when I used to know him. How do you do, physician? I was just saying that you don't look a day older than when you knew me as a girl. Simply the result of taking my own pills regular, ma'am. Only 2 and 3p a box, warranted efficacious by the government stamp. Now let me advise you to purchase the same immunity from the ravages of time by following my example. Only 2 and 3. The physician had produced a box from his waistcoat pocket, and Arabella was induced to make the purchase. At the same time, continued he, when the pills were paid for, you have the advantage of me, missus. Surely not Mrs. Fawley, once Miss Donne, of the vicinity of Mary Green. Yes, but Mrs. Cartlett now. Ah, you lost him then. Promising young fellow. A pupil of mine, you know. I taught him the dead languages, and believe me, he soon knew nearly as much as I. I lost him, but not as you think, said Arabella dryly. The lawyers untied us. There he is, Locke, alive and lusty, along with that young woman entering the art exhibition. Ah, dear me. Fond of her, apparently. They say they are cousins. Cousinship is a great convenience to their feelings, I should say. Yes, so her husband thought, no doubt, when he divorced her. Shall we look at the pictures, too? The trio followed across the green and entered. Jude and Sue, with the child, unaware of the interest they were exciting, had gone up to a model at one end of the building, which they regarded with considerable attention for a long while before they went on. Arabella and her friends came to it in due course, and the inscription it bore was, "Model of Cardinal College, Christminster, by J. Fawley and S. F. M. Bridehead." "Admiring their own work," said Arabella. "How like Jude, always thinking of colleges and Christminster, instead of attending to his business." They glanced cursorily at the pictures, and proceeded to the bandstand. When they had stood a little while listening to the music of the military performers, Jude, Sue, and the child came up on the other side. Arabella did not care if they should recognize her, but they were too deeply absorbed in their own lives, as translated into emotion by the military band, to perceive her under beaded veil. She walked round the outside of the listening throng, passing behind the lovers, whose movements had an unexpected fascination for her today. Scrutinizing them narrowly from the rear, she noticed that Jude's hand sought Sue's as they stood, the two standing close together so as to conceal, as they supposed, this tacit expression of their mutual responsiveness. "Silly fools, like 2 children," Arabella whispered to herself morosely, as she rejoined her companions, with whom she preserved a preoccupied silence. Annie, meanwhile, had jokingly remarked to Vilbert on Arabella's hankering interest in her first husband. "Now," said the physician to Arabella apart, "do you want anything such as this, Mrs. Cartlett? It is not compounded out of my regular pharmacopoeia, but I am sometimes asked for such a thing." He produced a small phial of clear liquid. "A love philter, such as was used by the ancients with great effect. I found it out by study of their writings, and have never known it to fail." "What is it made of?" asked Arabella, curiously. "Well, a distillation of the juices of doves' hearts, otherwise pigeons, is one of the ingredients. It took nearly 100 hearts to produce that small bottle full." "How do you get pigeons enough?" "To tell a secret, I get a piece of rock salt, of which pigeons are inordinately fond, and place it in a dovecot on my roof. In a few hours the birds come to it from all points of the compass, east, west, north, and south, and thus I secure as many as I require. You use the liquid by contriving that the desired man shall take about 10 drops of it in his drink. But remember, all this is told you because I gather from your questions that you mean to be a purchaser. You must keep faith with me." "Very well, I don't mind a bottle, to give some friend or other to try it on her young man." She produced 5 shillings, the price asked, and slipped the phial in her capacious bosom. Saying presently that she was due at an appointment with her husband, she sauntered away towards the refreshment bar, Jude, his companion, and the child having gone on to the horticultural tent, where Arabella caught a glimpse of them standing before a group of roses in bloom. She waited a few minutes, observing them, and then proceeded to join her spouse, with no very amiable sentiments. She found him seated on a stool by the bar, talking to one of the gaily dressed maids who had served him with spirits. "I should think you had had enough of this business at home," Arabella remarked gloomily. "Surely you didn't come 50 miles from your own bar to stick in another. Come, take me round the show as other men do their wives. Dammy, one would think you were a young bachelor with nobody to look after but yourself. But we agreed to meet here, and what could I do but wait?" "Well, now we have met, come along," she returned, ready to quarrel with the sun for shining on her, and they left the tent together, this pot-bellied man and florid woman, in the antipathetic, recriminatory mood of the average husband and wife of Christendom. In the meantime, the more exceptional couple and the boy still lingered in the pavilion of flowers, an enchanted palace to their appreciative taste, Sue's usually pale cheeks reflecting the pink of the tinted roses at which she gazed, for the gay sights, the air, the music, and the excitement of a day's outing with Jude had quickened her blood and made her eyes sparkle with vivacity. She adored roses, and what Arabella had witnessed was Sue detaining Jude almost against his will, while she learnt the names of this variety and that, and put her face within an inch of their blooms to smell them. "I should like to push my face quite into them, the dears," she had said, "but I suppose it is against the rules to touch them, isn't it, Jude?" "Yes, you baby," said he, and then playfully gave her a little push, so that her nose went among the petals. "The policeman will be down on us, and I shall say it was my husband's fault." Then she looked up at him, and smiled in a way that told so much to Arabella. "Happy?" he murmured. She nodded. "Why? Because you've come to the Great Wessex Agricultural Show, or because we have come?" "You are always trying to make me confess to all sorts of absurdities. Because I am improving my mind, of course, by seeing all these steam ploughs and threshing machines and chaff cutters and cows and pigs and sheep." Jude was quite content with a baffle from his ever-evasive companion. But when he had forgotten that he had put the question, and because he no longer wished for an answer, she went on, "I feel that we have returned to Greek joyousness and have blinded ourselves to sickness and sorrow, and have forgotten what 25 centuries have taught the race since their time. As one of your Christminster luminaries says, there is one immediate shadow, however, only one." And she looked at the aged child, whom, though they had taken him to everything likely to attract a young intelligence, they had utterly failed to interest. He knew what they were saying and thinking. "I am very, very sorry, Father and Mother," he said, "but please don't mind. I can't help it. I should like the flowers very, very much, if I didn't keep on thinking they'd be all withered in a few days." 6. The unnoticed lives that the pair had hitherto led began, from the day of the suspended wedding onwards, to be observed and discussed by other persons than Arabella. The society of Spring Street and the neighbourhood generally did not understand, and probably could not have been made to understand, Sue and Jude's private minds, emotions, positions, and fears. The curious facts of a child coming to them unexpectedly, who called Jude father and Sue mother, and a hitch in a marriage ceremony intended for quietness to be performed at a register's office, together with rumours of the undefended cases in the law courts, bore only one translation to plain minds. Little Time, for though he was formally turned into Jude, the apt nickname stuck to him, would come home from school in the evening and repeat inquiries and remarks that had been made to him by the other boys, and cause Sue and Jude, when he heard them, a great deal of pain and sadness. The result was that shortly after the attempt at the registrar's, the pair went off, to London it was believed, for several days, hiring somebody to look to the boy. When they came back, they let it be understood indirectly, and with total indifference and weariness of mien, that they were legally married at last. Sue, who had previously been called Mrs. Bridehead, now openly adopted the name of Mrs. Fawley. Her dull, cowed, and listless manner for days seemed to substantiate all this. But the mistake, as it was called, of their going away so secretly to do the business, kept up much of the mystery of their lives, and they found that they made no such advances with their neighbours as they had expected to do thereby. A living mystery was not much less interesting than a dead scandal. The baker's lad and the grocer's boy, who at first had used to lift their hats gallantly to Sue when they came to execute their errands, in these days no longer took the trouble to render her that homage, and the neighbouring artisans' wives looked straight along the pavement when they encountered her. Nobody molested them, it is true, but an oppressive atmosphere began to encircle their souls, particularly after their excursion to the show, as if that visit had brought some evil influence to bear on them, and their temperaments were precisely of a kind to suffer from this atmosphere, and to be indisposed to lighten it by vigorous and open statements. Their apparent attempt at reparation had come too late to be effective. The headstone and epitaph orders fell off, and 2 or 3 months later, when autumn came, Jude perceived that he would have to return to journey work again, a course all the more unfortunate just now, in that he had not as yet cleared off the debt he had unavoidably incurred in the payment of the law costs of the previous year. One evening he sat down to share the common meal with Sue and the child as usual. "I am thinking," he said to her, "that I'll hold on here no longer. The life suits us, certainly, but if we could get away to a place where we are unknown, we should be lighter-hearted and have a better chance. And so I am afraid we must break it up here, however awkward for you, poor dear." Sue was always much affected at a picture of herself as an object of pity, and she saddened. "Well, I am not sorry," she said presently. "I am much depressed by the way they look at me here, and you have been keeping on this house and furniture entirely for me and the boy. You don't want it yourself, and the expense is unnecessary. But whatever we do, wherever we go, you won't take him away from me, Jude, dear. I could not let him go now. The cloud upon his young mind makes him so pathetic to me, and I do hope to lift it some day. And he loves me so. You won't take him away from me?" "Certainly I won't, dear little girl. We'll get nice lodgings wherever we go. I shall be moving about, probably, getting a job here and a job there. I shall do something too, of course, till... Well, now I can't be useful in the lettering. It behoves me to turn my hand to something else. Don't hurry about getting employment, he said regretfully. I don't want you to do that. I wish you wouldn't, Sue. The boy and yourself are enough for you to attend to. There was a knock at the door, and Jude answered it. Sue could hear the conversation. Is Mr. Farley at home? Biles and Willis, the building contractors, sent me to know if you'll undertake the re-lettering of the 10 Commandments in a little church they've been restoring lately in the country near here. Jude reflected, and said he could undertake it. It's not a very artistic job, continued the messenger. The clergyman is a very old-fashioned chap, and he's refused to let anything more be done to the church than cleaning and repairing. Excellent old man, said Sue to herself, who was sentimentally opposed to the horrors of over-restoration. The 10 Commandments are fixed to the east end, the messenger went on, and they want doing up with the rest of the wall there, since he won't have them carted off as old materials belonging to the contractor in the usual way of the trade. A bargain as to terms was struck, and Jude came indoors. There, you see, he said cheerfully, one more job yet, at any rate, and you can help in it, at least you can try. We shall have all the church to ourselves as the rest of the work is finished. Next day Jude went out to the church, which was only 2 miles off. He found that what the contractor's clerk had said was true. The tables of the Jewish law towered sternly over the utensils of Christian grace as the chief ornament of the chancel end, in the fine dry style of the last century, and as their framework was constructed of ornamental plaster they could not be taken down for repair. A portion, crumbled by damp, required renewal, and when this had been done and the whole cleansed, he began to renew the lettering. On the second morning Sue came to see what assistance she could render, and also because they liked to be together. The silence and emptiness of the building gave her confidence, and standing on a safe low platform erected by Jude, which she was nevertheless timid at mounting, she began painting in the letters at the first table, while he set about mending a portion of the second. She was quite pleased at her powers. She had acquired them in the days she painted illumined text for the church fitting shop at Christminster. Nobody seemed likely to disturb them, and the pleasant twitter of birds and rustle of October leafage came in through an open window and mingled with their talk. They were not, however, to be left thus snug and peaceful for long. About 12:30 there came footsteps on the gravel without. The old vicar and his church warden entered, and coming up to see what was being done, seemed surprised to discover that a young woman was assisting. They passed on into an aisle, at which time the door again opened, and another figure entered, a small one, that of little Time, who was crying. Sue had told him where he might find her between school hours if he wished. She came down from her perch and said, "What's the matter, my dear?" "I couldn't stay to eat my dinner in school because they said—" He described how some boys had taunted him about his nominal mother, and Sue, grieved, expressed her indignation to Jude aloft. The child went into the churchyard, and Sue returned to her work. Meanwhile, the door had opened again, and there shuffled in with a business-like air the white-aproned woman who cleaned the church. Sue recognized her as one who had friends in Spring Street whom she visited. The church cleaner looked at Sue, gaped, and lifted her hands. She had evidently recognized Jude's companion as the latter had recognized her. Next came 2 ladies, and after talking to the charwoman, they also moved forward, and as Sue stood reaching upward, watched her hand tracing the letters, and critically regarded her person in relief against the white wall, till she grew so nervous that she trembled visibly. They went back to where the others were standing, talking in undertones, and one said, Sue could not hear which, "She's his wife, I suppose." "Some say yes, some say no," was the reply from the charwoman. "Not? Then she ought to be, or somebody's, that's very clear. They've only been married a few weeks, whether or no. A strange pair to be painting the two tables. I wonder Biles and Willis could think of such a thing as hiring those." The churchwarden supposed that Biles and Willis knew of nothing wrong, and then the other, who had been talking to the old woman, explained what she meant by calling them strange people. The probable drift of the subdued conversation which followed was made plain by the churchwarden breaking into an anecdote in a voice that everybody in the church could hear, though obviously suggested by the present situation. "Well, now, it is a curious thing, but my grandfather told me a strange tale of a most immoral case that happened at the painting of the Commandments in a church out by Gaymead, which is quite within a walk of this one. In them days, Commandments were mostly done in gilt letters on a black ground, and that's how they were out where I say, before the old church was rebuilded. It must have been somewhere about 100 years ago that them Commandments wanted doing up, just as ours do here, and they had to get men from Aldbrickham to do 'em. Now they wished to get the job finished by a particular Sunday, so the men had to work late Saturday night against their will, for overtime was not paid then as 'tis now. There was no true religion in the country at that date, neither among parsons, clerks, nor people, and to keep the men up to their work the vicar had to let 'em have plenty of drink during the afternoon. As evening drawed on, they sent for some more themselves, rum by all accounts. It got later and later, and they got more and more fuddled, till at last they went a-putting their rum bottle and rummers upon the communion table, and drawed up a trestle or two, and sate round comfortable, and poured out again right hearty bumpers. No sooner had they tossed off their glasses than, so the story goes, they fell down senseless, one and all. How long they bode so they didn't know, but when they came to themselves there was a terrible thunderstorm arranging, and they seemed to see in the gloom a dark figure with very thin legs and a curious foot a-standing on the ladder and finishing their work. When it got daylight, they could see that the work was really finished, and couldn't at all mind finishing it themselves. They went home, and the next thing they heard was that a great scandal had been caused in the church that Sunday morning, for when the people came and service began, all saw that the 10 Commandments was painted with the knots left out. Decent people wouldn't attend service there for a long time, and the bishop had to be sent for to reconsecrate the church. That's the tradition as I used to hear it as a child. You must take it for what it's worth, but this case today has reminded me o't, as I say." The visitors gave one more glance, as if to see whether Jude and Sue had left the knots out likewise, and then severally left the church, even the old woman at last. Sue and Jude, who had not stopped working, sent back the child to school and remained without speaking, till, looking back at her narrowly, he found that she had been crying silently. "Never mind, comrade," he said. "I know what it is. I can't bear that they and everybody should think people wicked because they may have chosen to live their own way. It is really these opinions that make the best-intentioned people reckless and actually become immoral. Never be cast down. It was only a funny story." "Ah, but we suggested it. I'm afraid I have done you mischief, Jude, instead of helping you by coming." To have suggested such a story was certainly not very exhilarating in a serious view of their position. However, in a few minutes Sue seemed to see that their position this morning had a ludicrous side, and wiping her eyes she laughed. "It is droll, after all," she said, "that we two, of all people, with our queer history, should happen to be here painting the 10 Commandments, you, a reprobate, and I, in my condition, oh dear!" And with her hand over her eyes she laughed again, silently and intermittently, till she was quite weak. "That's better," said Jude gaily. "Now we are right again, aren't we, little girl?" "Oh, but it is serious all the same," she sighed, as she took up the brush and righted herself. "But do you see? They don't think we are married. They won't believe it. It is extraordinary." "I don't care whether they think so or not," said Jude. "I shan't take any more trouble to make them." They sat down to lunch, which they had brought with them, not to hinder time, and having eaten it, were about to set to work anew, when a man entered the church, and Jude recognized him in the contractor, Willis. He beckoned to Jude, and spoke to him apart. "Here, I've just had a complaint about this," he said, with rather breathless awkwardness. "I don't wish to go into the matter, as of course I didn't know what was going on, but I'm afraid I must ask you and her to leave off, and let somebody else finish this. It is best, to avoid all unpleasantness. I'll pay you for the week, all the same." Jude was too independent to make any fuss, and the contractor paid him and left. Jude picked up his tools, and Sue cleansed her brush. Then their eyes met. "How could we be so simple as to suppose we might do this?" said she, dropping to her tragic note. "Of course we ought not. I ought not to have come." "I had no idea that anybody was going to intrude into such a lonely place and see us," Jude returned. "Well, it can't be helped, dear, and of course I wouldn't wish to injure Willis's trade connection by staying." They sat down passively for a few minutes, proceeded out of the church, and overtaking the boy, pursued their thoughtful way to Old Wickham. Fawley had still a pretty zeal in the cause of education, and, as was natural with his experiences, he was active in furthering equality of opportunity by any humble means open to him. He had joined an Artisans' Mutual Improvement Society established in the town about the time of his arrival there, its members being young men of all creeds and denominations, including churchmen, Congregationalists, Baptists, Unitarians, Positivists, and others. Agnostics had scarcely been heard of at this time, their one common wish to enlarge their minds forming a sufficiently close bond of union. The subscription was small, and the room homely, and Jude's activity, uncustomary acquirements, and above all, singular intuition on what to read and how to set about it, begotten of his years of struggle against malignant stars, had led to his being placed on the committee. A few evenings after his dismissal from the church repairs, and before he had obtained any more work to do, he went to attend a meeting of the aforesaid committee. It was late when he arrived. All the others had come, and as he entered they looked dubiously at him and hardly uttered a word of greeting. He guessed that something bearing on himself had been either discussed or mooted. Some ordinary business was transacted, and it was disclosed that the number of subscriptions had shown a sudden falling off for that quarter. One member, a really well-meaning and upright man, began speaking in enigmas about certain possible causes, that it behoved them to look well into their constitution, for if the committee were not respected, and had not at least, in their differences, a common standard of conduct, they would bring the institution to the ground. Nothing further was said in Jude's presence, but he knew what this meant, and turning to the table, wrote a note resigning his office there and then. Thus the supersensitive couple were more and more impelled to go away, and then bills were sent in, and the question arose, what could Jude do with his great-aunt's heavy old furniture, if he left the town to travel he knew not whither? This, and the necessity of ready money, compelled him to decide on an auction, much as he would have preferred to keep the venerable goods. The day of the sale came on, and Sue for the last time cooked her own, the child's, and Jude's breakfast in the little house he had furnished. It chanced to be a wet day. Moreover, Sue was unwell, and not wishing to desert her poor Jude in such gloomy circumstances, for he was compelled to stay a while, she acted on the suggestion of the auctioneer's man, and ensconced herself in an upper room which would be emptied of its effects, and so kept closed to the bidders. Here Jude discovered her, and with the child, and their few trunks, baskets, and bundles, and 2 chairs and a table that were not in the sale, the two sat in meditative talk. Footsteps began stamping up and down the bare stairs, the comers inspecting the goods, some of which were of so quaint and ancient a make as to acquire an adventitious value as art. Their door was tried once or twice, and to guard themselves against intrusion, Jude wrote "Private" on a scrap of paper and stuck it upon the panel. They soon found that, instead of the furniture, their own personal histories and past conduct began to be discussed to an unexpected and intolerable extent by the intending bidders. It was not till now that they had really discovered what a fool's paradise of supposed unrecognition they had been living in of late. Sue silently took her companion's hand, and with her eyes on each other they heard these passing remarks, the quaint and mysterious personality of Father Time being a subject which formed a large ingredient in the hints and innuendos. At length the auction began in the room below, whence they could hear each familiar article knocked down, the highly prized ones cheaply, the unconsidered at an unexpected price. "People don't understand us," he sighed heavily. "I am glad we have decided to go. The question is, where to? It ought to be London. There one can live as one chooses." "No, not London, dear. I know it well. We should be unhappy there." "Why? Can't you think?" "Because Arabella is there. That's the chief reason. But in the country I shall always be uneasy lest there should be some more of our late experience, and I don't care to lessen it by explaining, for one thing, all about the boy's history. To cut him off from his past I have determined to keep silence. I am sickened of ecclesiastical work now, and I shouldn't like to accept it if offered me." "You ought to have learned classic. Gothic is barbaric art, after all. Pugin was wrong, and Wren was right. Remember the interior of Christminster Cathedral, almost the first place in which we looked in each other's faces. Under the picturesqueness of those Norman details, one can see the grotesque childishness of uncouth people trying to imitate the vanished Roman forms, remembered by dim tradition only. Yes, you have half converted me to that view by what you have said before, but one can work and despise what one does. I must do something, if not church Gothic." "I wish we could both follow an occupation in which personal circumstances don't count," she said, smiling up wistfully. "I am as disqualified for teaching as you are for ecclesiastical art. You must fall back upon railway stations, bridges, theatres, music halls, hotels, everything that has no connection with conduct. I am not skilled in those. I ought to take to bread baking. I grew up in the business with Aunt, you know, but even a baker must be conventional to get customers. Unless he keeps a cake and gingerbread stall at markets and fairs where people are gloriously indifferent to everything except the quality of the goods." Their thoughts were diverted by the voice of the auctioneer. "Now, this antique oak settle, a unique example of old English furniture, worthy the attention of all collectors." "That was my great-grandfather's," said Jude. "I wish we could have kept the poor old thing." One by one the articles went, and the afternoon passed away. Jude and the other two were getting tired and hungry, but after the conversation they had heard, they were shy of going out, while the purchasers were in their line of retreat. However, the later lots drew on, and it became necessary to emerge into the rain soon to take on Sue's things to their temporary lodging. "Now the next lot. 2 pairs of pigeons, all alive and plump. A nice pie for somebody for next Sunday's dinner." The impending sale of these birds had been the most trying suspense of the whole afternoon. They were Sue's pets, and when it was found that they could not possibly be kept, more sadness was caused than by parting from all the furniture. Sue tried to think away her tears as she heard the trifling sum that her dears were deemed to be worth advanced by small stages to the price at which they were finally knocked down. The purchaser was a neighbouring poulterer, and they were unquestionably doomed to die before the next market day. Noting her dissembled distress, Jude kissed her, and said it was time to go and see if the lodgings were ready. He would go on with the boy and fetch her soon. When she was left alone, she waited patiently, but Jude did not come back. At last she started, the coast being clear, and on passing the poulterer's shop, not far off, she saw her pigeons in a hamper by the door. An emotion at sight of them, assisted by the growing dusk of evening, caused her to act on impulse, and first looking around her quickly, she pulled out the peg which fastens down the cover and went on. The cover was lifted from within, and the pigeons flew away with a clatter that brought the chagrined poulterer cursing and swearing to the door. Sue reached the lodging trembling, and found Jude and the boy making it comfortable for her. "Do the buyers pay before they bring away the things?" she asked breathlessly. "Yes, I think. Why?" "Because then I've done such a wicked thing," and she explained in bitter contrition. "I shall have to pay the poulterer for them if he doesn't catch them," said Jude. "But never mind. Don't fret about it, dear." "It was so foolish of me. Oh, why should nature's law be mutual butchery?" "Is it so, mother?" asked the boy intently. "Yes," said Sue vehemently. "Well, they must take their chance now, poor things," said Jude. "As soon as the sale account is wound up and our bills paid, we go." "Where do we go to?" asked Time, in suspense. "We must sail under sealed orders that nobody may trace us. We mustn't go to Alfredston, or to Melchester, or to Shaston, or to Christminster. Apart from those, we may go anywhere." "Why mustn't we go there, father?" "Because of a cloud that has gathered over us. Though we have wronged no man, corrupted no man, defrauded no man, so perhaps we have done that which was right in our own eyes." 7. From that week, Jude, Fawley, and Sue walked no more in the town of Aldbrickham. Whither they had gone, nobody knew, chiefly because nobody cared to know. Any one sufficiently curious to trace the steps of such an obscure pair might have discovered without great trouble that they had taken advantage of his adaptive craftsmanship to enter on a shifting, almost nomadic life, which was not without its pleasantness for a time. Whenever Jude heard of freestone work to be done, thither he went, choosing by preference places remote from his old haunts and Sue's. He laboured at a job, long or briefly, till it was finished, and then moved on. 2 whole years and a half passed thus. Sometimes he might have been found shaping the mullions of a country mansion, sometimes setting the parapet of a town hall, sometimes ashlering an hotel at Sandbourne, sometimes a museum at Casterbridge, sometimes as far down as Exonbury, sometimes at Stoke Bare Hills. Later still, he was at Kennetbridge, a thriving town not more than a dozen miles south of Marygreen, this being his nearest approach to the village where he was known, for he had a sensitive dread of being questioned as to his life and fortunes by those who had been acquainted with him during his ardent young manhood of study and promise, and his brief and unhappy married life at that time. At some of these places he would be detained for months, at others only a few weeks. His curious and sudden antipathy to ecclesiastical work, both episcopal and nonconformist, which had risen in him when suffering under a smarting sense of misconception, remained with him in cold blood, less from any fear of renewed censure than from an ultra-conscientiousness which would not allow him to seek a living out of those who would disapprove of his ways. Also, too, from a sense of inconsistency between his former dogmas and his present practice, hardly a shred of the beliefs with which he had first gone up to Christminster now remaining with him. He was mentally approaching the position which Sue had occupied when he first met her. On a Saturday evening in May, nearly 3 years after Arabella's recognition of Sue and himself at the agricultural show, some of those who there encountered each other met again. It was the spring fair at Kennetbridge, and though this ancient trade meeting had much dwindled from its dimensions of former times, the long straight street of the borough presented a lively scene about midday. At this hour a light trap, among other vehicles, was driven into the town by the North Road and up to the door of a temperance inn. There alighted 2 women, one the driver, an ordinary country person, the other a finely built figure in the deep mourning of a widow. Her sombre suit, of pronounced cut, caused her to appear a little out of place in the medley and bustle of a provincial fair. "I will just find out where it is, Annie," said the widow lady to her companion, when the horse and cart had been taken by a man who came forward, "and then I'll come back and meet you here, and we'll go in and have something to eat and drink. I begin to feel quite a sinking." "With all my heart," said the other, "though I would sooner have put up at the Chequers or the Jack. You can't get much at these temperance houses." "Now don't you give way to gluttonous desires, my child," said the woman in weeds, reprovingly. "This is the proper place." "Very well. We'll meet in half an hour, unless you come with me to find out where the site of the new chapel is." "I don't care to. You can tell me." The companions then went their several ways, the one in crape walking firmly along with a mien of disconnection from her miscellaneous surroundings. Making inquiries, she came to a hoarding, within which were excavations denoting the foundations of a building, and on the boards without 1 or 2 large posters announcing that the foundation stone of the chapel about to be erected would be laid that afternoon at 3 o'clock by a London preacher of great popularity among his body. Having ascertained thus much, the immensely weeded widow retraced her steps and gave herself leisure to observe the movements of the fair. By and by her attention was arrested by a little stall of cakes and gingerbreads standing between the more pretentious erections of trestles and canvas. It was covered with an immaculate cloth, and tended by a young woman apparently unused to the business, she being accompanied by a boy with an octogenarian face, who assisted her. "Upon my senses," murmured the widow to herself, "his wife, Sue, if she is so." She drew nearer to the stall. "How do you do, Mrs. Fawley?" she said blandly. Sue changed colour and recognized Arabella through the crape veil. "How are you, Mrs. Cartlett?" she said stiffly. And then, perceiving Arabella's garb, her voice grew sympathetic in spite of herself. "How are you, Mrs. Cartlett?" she said stiffly, and then, perceiving Arabella's garb, her voice grew sympathetic in spite of herself. "What? Have you lost—" "My poor husband. Yes. He died suddenly 6 weeks ago, leaving me none too well off, though he was a kind husband to me. that whatever profit there is in public housekeeping goes to them that brew the liquors and not to them that retail 'em. And you, my little old man, you don't know me, I expect." "Yes, I do. You be the woman I thought were my mother for a bit, till I found you wasn't," replied Father Time, who had learned to use the Wessex tongue quite naturally by now. "All right, never mind, I'm a friend." "Dewey," said Sue suddenly, "go down to the station platform with this tray. There's another train coming in, I think." When he was gone, Arabella continued, "He'll never be a beauty, will he, poor chap? Does he know I am his mother really?" "No. He thinks there is some mystery about his parentage, that's all. Jude is going to tell him when he's a little older." "But how do you come to be doing this? I am surprised." "It is only a temporary occupation, a fancy of ours while we are in difficulty." "Then you are living with him still?" "Yes." "Married?" "Of course." "Any children?" "2." "And another coming soon, I see." Sue writhed under the hard and direct questioning, and her tender little mouth began to quiver. "Lord, I mean, good gracious, what is there to cry about? Some folks will be proud enough." "It is not that I am ashamed, not as you think, but it seems such a terribly tragic thing to bring beings into the world, so presumptuous, that I question my right to do it sometimes." "Take it easy, my dear. But you don't tell me why you do such a thing as this. Jude used to be a proud sort of chap, above any business almost, leave alone keeping a standing." "Perhaps my husband has altered a little since then. I am sure he is not proud now," and Sue's lips quivered again. "I am doing this because he caught a chill early in the year while putting up some stonework of a music hall at Quartershot, which he had to do in the rain, the work having to be executed by a fixed day. He is better than he was, but it has been a long, weary time. We have an old widow friend with us to help us through it, but she's leaving soon." "Well, I am respectable too, thank God, and of a serious way of thinking since my loss. Why did you choose to sell gingerbreads?" "That's a pure accident. He was brought up to the baking business, and it occurred to him to try his hand at these, which he can make without coming out of doors. We call them Christminster cakes. They are a great success." "I never saw any like 'em. Why, they are windows and towers and pinnacles, and upon my word they are very nice." She had helped herself, and was unceremoniously munching one of the cakes. "Yes, they are reminiscences of the Christminster colleges, traceried windows and cloisters, you see. It was a whim of his to do them in pastry." "Still harping on Christminster, even in his cakes," laughed Arabella. "Just like Jude, a rolling passion. What a queer fellow he is, and always will be." Sue sighed, and she looked her distress at hearing him criticized. "Don't you think he is? Come now, you do, though you are so fond of him." "Of course Christminster is a sort of fixed vision with him, which I suppose he'll never be cured of believing in. He still thinks it's a great centre of high and fearless thought, instead of what it is, a nest of commonplace schoolmasters, whose characteristic is timid obsequiousness to tradition." Arabella was quizzing Sue with more regard of how she was speaking than of what she was saying. "How odd to hear a woman selling cakes talk like that," she said. "Why don't you go back to school-keeping?" Sue shook her head. "They won't have me." "Because of the divorce, I suppose." "That and other things, and there is no reason to wish it. We gave up all ambition, and were never so happy in our lives till his illness came." "Where are you living?" "I don't care to say." "Here in Kennetbridge?" Sue's manner showed Arabella that her random guess was right. "Here comes the boy back again," continued Arabella. "My boy and Jude's." Sue's eyes darted a spark.
"You needn't throw that in my face," she cried. "Very well, though I half feel as I should like to have him with me. But, Lord, I don't want to take him from 'ee, ever I should sin to speak so profane, though I think you must have had enough of your own. He's in very good hands, that I know, and I'm not the woman to find fault with what the Lord has ordained. I've reached a more resigned frame of mind." "Indeed, I wish I had been able to do so." "You should try," replied the widow, from the serene heights of a soul conscious not only of spiritual but of social superiority. "I make no boast of my awakening, but I'm not what I was. After Cartlett's death I was passing the chapel in the street next ours, and went into it for shelter from a shower of rain. I felt a need of some sort of support under my loss, and as 'twas righter than gin, I took to going there reg'lar, and found it a great comfort. But I've left London now, you know, and at present I'm living at Alfredston with my friend Annie, to be near my old country. I'm not come here to the fair to-day. There's to be a foundation stone of a new chapel laid this afternoon by a popular London preacher, and I drove over with Annie. Now I must get back to meet her." Then Arabella wished Sue good-bye and went on. 8. In the afternoon, Sue and the other people bustling about Kennetbridge Fair could hear singing inside the placarded hoarding further down the street. Those who peeped through the opening saw a crowd of persons in broadcloth with hymn-books in their hands standing round the excavations for the new chapel walls. Arabella Cartlett and her weeds stood among them. She had a clear, powerful voice which could be distinctly heard with the rest, rising and falling to the tune, her inflated bosom being also seen doing likewise. It was 2 hours later on that same day that Annie and Mrs. Cartlett, having had tea at the Temperance Hotel, started on their return journey across the high and open country which stretches between Kennetbridge and Alfredston. Arabella was in a thoughtful mood, but her thoughts were not of the new chapel, as Annie at first surmised. "No, it is something else," at last said Arabella sullenly. "I came here today never thinking of anybody but poor Cartlett, or of anything but spreading the gospel by means of this new tabernacle they've begun this afternoon. But something has happened to turn my mind another way quite. Annie, I've heard of 'un again, and I've seen her." "Who?" "I've heard of Jude, and I've seen his wife. And ever since, do what I will, and though I've sung the hymns with all my strength, I've not been able to help thinking about 'un, which I've no right to do as a chapel member. Can't you fix your mind upon what was said by the London preacher today, and try to get rid of your wandering fancies that way?" "I do, but my wicked heart will ramble off in spite of myself." "Well, I know what it is to have a wanton mind, my own too. If you only knew what I do dream sometime o' nights, quite against my wishes, you'd say I had my struggles." Annie, too, had grown rather serious of late, her lover having jilted her. "What shall I do about it?" urged Arabella morbidly. "You could take a lock of your late lost husband's hair and have it made into a mourning brooch, and look at it every hour of the day." "I haven't a morsel, and if I had 'twould be no good. After all that's said about the comforts of this religion, I wish I had Jude back again." "You must fight valiant against the feeling since he's another's. And I've heard that another good thing for it, when it afflicts voluptuous widows, is to go to your husband's grave in the dusk of an evening and stand a long while bowed down." "Pooh! I know as well as you what I should do, only I don't do it." They drove in silence along the straight road till they were within the horizon of Mary Green, which lay not far to the left of their route. They came to the junction of the highway and the cross lane leading to that village whose church tower could be seen athwart the hollow. When they got yet farther on, and were passing the lonely house in which Arabella and Jude had lived during the first months of their marriage, and where the pig-killing had taken place, She could control herself no longer. "He's mine more than hers," she burst out. "What right has she to him, I should like to know? I'd take him from her if I could." "Fie, Abby, and your husband only 6 weeks gone. Pray against it." "Be damned if I do. Feelings are feelings. I won't be a creeping hypocrite any longer, so there." Arabella had hastily drawn from her pocket a bundle of tracts which she had brought with her to distribute at the fair, and of which she had given away several. As she spoke, she flung the whole remainder of the packet into the hedge. "I've tried that sort of physic and have failed with it. I must be as I was born." "Hush, you be excited, dear. Now you come along home quiet and have a cup of tea, and don't let us talk about un no more. We won't come out this road again as it leads to where he is, 'cause it inflames 'ee so. You'll be all right again soon." Arabella did calm herself down by degrees, and they crossed the ridgeway. When they began to descend the long straight hill, they saw plodding along in front of them an elderly man of spare stature and thoughtful gait. In his hand he carried a basket, and there was a touch of slovenliness in his attire, together with that indefinable something in his whole appearance which suggested one who was his own housekeeper, purveyor, confidant, and friend, through possessing nobody else at all in the world to act in those capacities for him. The remainder of the journey was downhill, and guessing him to be going to Alfredston, they offered him a lift, which he accepted. Arabella looked at him, and looked again, till at length she spoke. "If I don't mistake, I am talking to Mr. Phillotson." The wayfarer faced round and regarded her in turn. "Yes, my name is Phillotson," he said, "but I don't recognize you, ma'am." "I remember you well enough when you used to be schoolmaster out at Mary Green, and I one of your scholars. I used to walk up there from Crescombe every day, because we had only a mistress down at our place, and you taught better. But you wouldn't remember me as I should you. Arabella Dunn." He shook his head. "No," he said politely, "I don't recall the name, and I should hardly recognize in your present portly self the slim school-child no doubt you were then." "Well, I always had plenty of flesh on my bones. However, I am staying down here with some friends at present. You know, I suppose, who I married?" "No." "Jude Fawley, also a scholar of yours, at least a night scholar, for some little time, I think, and known to you afterwards, if I am not mistaken." Dear me, said Phillotson, starting out of his stiffness. "You Fawley's wife? To be sure. He had a wife, and I understood, divorced her, as you did yours, perhaps for better reasons." "Indeed?" "Well, he might have been right in doing it, right for both, for I soon married again, and all went pretty straight till my husband died lately, but you were decidedly wrong." "No," said Phillotson with sudden testiness, "I would rather not talk of this, but I am convinced I did only what was right and just and moral. I have suffered for my act and opinions, but I hold to them, though her loss was a loss to me in more ways than one." "You lost your school and good income through her, did you not?" "I don't care to talk of it. I have recently come back here, to Mary Green, I mean." "You are keeping the school there again, just as formerly?" The pressure of a sadness that would out unsealed him. "I am there," he replied. "Just as formerly, no. Merely on sufferance. It was a last resource, a small thing to return to after my move upwards and my long indulged hopes, a returning to zero with all its humiliations. But it is a refuge. I like the seclusion of the place, and the vicar having known me before my so-called eccentric conduct towards my wife had ruined my reputation as a schoolmaster,
He accepted my services when all other schools were closed against me. However, although I take £50 a year here after taking above 200 elsewhere, I prefer it to running the risk of having my old domestic experiences raked up against me, as I should do if I tried to make a move. Right you are. A contented mind is a continual feast. She has done no better. She is not doing well, you mean? I met her by accident at Bridge this very day, and she is anything but thriving. Her husband is ill, and she's anxious. You made a fool of a mistake about her, I'll tell 'ee again, and the harm you did yourself by dirting your own nest serves you right, excusing the liberty. How? She was innocent. But nonsense, they did not even defend the case. That was because they didn't care to. She was quite innocent of what obtained you your freedom at the time you obtained it. I saw her just afterwards, and proved it to myself completely by talking to her. Phillotson grasped the edge of the spring cart, and appeared to be much stressed and worried by the information. Still, she wanted to go, he said. Yes, but you shouldn't have let her. That's the only way with these fanciful women that soar high, innocent or guilty. She'd have come round in time. We all do. Custom does it. It's all the same in the end. However, I think she's fond of her man still, whatever he might be of her. You were too quick about her. I shouldn't have let her go. I should have kept her chained on. Her spirit for kicking would have been broke soon enough. There's nothing like bondage and a stone-deaf taskmaster for taming us women. Besides, you've got the laws on your side. Moses knew. Don't you call to mind what he says? Not for the moment, ma'am, I regret to say. Call yourself a schoolmaster. I used to think of it when they read it in church, and I was carrying on a bit. Then shall the man be guiltless, but the woman shall bear her iniquity. Damn rough on us women, but we must grin and put up with it. Oh, well, she's got her deserts now. Yes, said Phillotson with biting sadness. Cruelty is the law pervading all nature and society, and we can't get out of it if we would. Well, don't you forget to try it next time, old man. I cannot answer you, madam. I have never known much of womankind. They had now reached the low levels bordering Alfredston, and passing through the outskirts approached a mill to which Phillotson said his errand led him, whereupon they drew up, and he alighted, bidding them good night in a preoccupied mood. In the meantime, Sue, though remarkably successful in her cake-selling experiment at Bridge Fair, had lost the temporary brightness which had begun to sit upon her sadness on account of that success. When all her Christminster cakes had been disposed of, she took upon her arm the empty basket and the cloth which had covered the standing she had hired, and giving the other things to the boy, left the street with him. They followed a lane to a distance of half a mile, till they met an old woman carrying a child in short clothes, and leading a toddler in the other hand. Sue kissed the children, and said, "How is he now?" "Still better," returned Mrs. Edlin cheerfully. "Before you are upstairs again, your husband will be well enough. Don't he trouble." They turned, and came to some old dun-tiled cottages with gardens and fruit trees. Into one of these they entered by lifting the latch without knocking, and were at once in the general living-room. Here they greeted Jude, who was sitting in an arm-chair, the increased delicacy of his normally delicate features and the childishly expectant look in his eyes being alone sufficient to show that he had been passing through a severe illness. "What, have you sold them all?" he said, a gleam of interest lighting up his face. "Yes, arcades, gables, east windows and all," she told him the pecuniary results, and then hesitated.
At last, when they were left alone, she informed him of the unexpected meeting with Arabella and the latter's widowhood. Jude was discomposed. "What? Is she living here?" he said. "No, at Alfredston," said Sue. Jude's countenance remained clouded. "I thought I had better tell you," she continued, kissing him anxiously. "Yes. Dear me. Arabella not in the depths of London, but down here. It is only a little over a dozen miles across the country to Alfredston. What is she doing there?" Sue told him all she knew. "She has taken to chapel going," Sue added, "and talks accordingly." "Well," said Jude, "perhaps it is for the best that we have almost decided to move on. I feel much better today, and shall be well enough to leave in a week or two. Then Mrs. Edlin can go home again. Dear, faithful old soul, the only friend we have in the world." "Where do you think to go to?" Sue asked, a troublessness in her tones. Then Jude confessed what was in his mind. He said it would surprise her, perhaps, after his having resolutely avoided all the old places for so long, but one thing and another had made him think a great deal of Christminster lately, and if she didn't mind, he would like to go back there. Why should they care if they were known? It was over-sensitive of them to mind so much. They could go on selling cakes there, for that matter, if he couldn't work. He had no sense of shame at mere poverty, and perhaps he would be as strong as ever soon and able to set up stone-cutting for himself there. "Why should you care so much for Christminster?" she said pensively. "Christminster cares nothing for you, poor dear." "Well, I do. I can't help it. I love the place, although I know how it hates all men like me, the so-called self-taught, how it scorns our laboured acquisitions when it should be the first to respect them, how it sneers at our false quantities and mispronunciations when it should say, 'I see you want help, my poor friend.' Nevertheless, it is the centre of the universe to me, because of my early dream, and nothing can alter it. Perhaps it will soon wake up and be generous. I pray so. I should like to go back to live there, perhaps to die there. In 2 or 3 weeks I might, I think. It will then be June, and I should like to be there by a particular day." His hope that he was recovering proved so far well grounded that in 3 weeks they had arrived in the city of many memories, were actually treading its pavements, receiving the reflection of the sunshine from its wasting walls. Part 6. At Christminster again. And she humbled her body greatly, and all the places of her joy she filled with her torn hair. Esther, Apocalypse. There are 2 who decline, a woman and I, and enjoy our death in the darkness here. Robert Browning. 1. On their arrival, the station was lively with straw-hatted young men, welcoming young girls who bore a remarkable family likeness to their welcomers, and who were dressed up in their brightest and lightest of raiment. "The place seems gay," said Sue. "Why, it is Remembrance Day. Jude, how sly of you! You came today on purpose." "Yes," said Jude quietly, as he took charge of the small child and told Arabella's boy to keep close to them, Sue attending to their own eldest. "I thought we might as well come today as on any other." "But I am afraid it will depress you," she said, looking anxiously at him up and down. "Oh, I mustn't let it interfere with our business, and we have a good deal to do before we shall be settled here. The first thing is lodgings." Having left their luggage and his tools at the station, they proceeded on foot up the familiar street, the holiday people all drifting in the same direction. Reaching the Four-Ways, they were about to turn off to where accommodation was likely to be found, when, looking at the clock and the hurrying crowd, Jude said, "Let us go and see the procession and never mind the lodgings just now. We can get them afterwards." "Oughtn't we to get a house over our heads first?" she asked. But his soul seemed full of the anniversary, and together they went down Chief Street, their smallest child in Jude's arms, Sue leading her little girl, and Arabella's boy walking thoughtfully and silently beside them. Crowds of pretty sisters in airy costumes, and meekly ignorant parents who had known no college in their youth, were under convoy in the same direction by brothers and sons bearing the opinion written large on them that no properly qualified human beings had lived on earth till they came to grace it here and now. "My failure is reflected on me by every one of those young fellows," said Jude. "A lesson on presumption is awaiting me today. Humiliation day for me. If you, my darling, hadn't come to my rescue, I should have gone to the dogs with despair." She saw from his face that he was getting into one of his tempestuous, self-harrowing moods. "It would have been better if we had gone at once about our own affairs, dear," she answered. "I am sure this sight will awaken old sorrows in you and do no good." "Well, we are near. We will see it now," said he. They turned in on the left by the church with the Italian porch, whose helical columns were heavily draped with creepers, and pursued the lane till there arose on Jude's sight the circular theatre with that well-known lantern above it, which stood in his mind as the sad symbol of his abandoned hopes. For it was from that outlook that he had finally surveyed the city of colleges on the afternoon of his great meditation, which convinced him at last of the futility of his attempt to be a son of the university. Today, in the open space stretching between this building and the nearest college, stood a crowd of expectant people. A passage was kept clear through their midst by two barriers of timber extending from the door of the college to the door of the large building between it and the theatre. "Here is the place. They're just going to pass," cried Jude in sudden excitement, and pushing his way to the front, he took up a position close to the barrier, hugging the youngest child in his arms, while Sue and the others kept immediately behind him. The crowd filled in at their back, and fell to talking, joking, and laughing, as carriage after carriage drew up at the lower door of the college, and solemn, stately figures in blood-red robes began to alight. The sky had grown overcast and livid, and thunder rumbled now and then. Father Time shuddered. "It do seem like the Judgment Day," he whispered. "They are only learned doctors," said Sue. While they waited, big drops of rain fell on their heads and shoulders, and the delay grew tedious. Sue again wished not to stay. "They won't be long now," said Jude, without turning his head. But the procession did not come forth, and somebody in the crowd, to pass the time, looked at the facade of the nearest college, and said he wondered what was meant by the Latin inscription in its midst. Jude, who stood near the inquirer, explained it, and finding that the people all round him were listening with interest, went on to describe the carving of the frieze, which he had studied years before, and to criticize some details of masonry in other college fronts about the city. The idle crowd, including the two policemen at the doors, stared like the Lycaonians at Paul, for Jude was apt to get too enthusiastic over any subject in hand, and they seemed to wonder how the stranger should know more about the buildings of their town than they themselves did, till one of them said, "Why, I know that man. He used to work here years ago. Jude Fawley, that's his name. Don't you mind he used to be nicknamed Tutor of St. Slums, do you mind? Because he aimed at that line of business. He's married, I suppose, then, and that's his child he's carrying. Taylor would know him, as he knows everybody." The speaker was a man named Jack Stagg, with whom Jude had formerly worked in repairing the college masonries. Tinker Taylor was seen to be standing near. Having his attention called, the latter cried across the barrier to Jude, You've honoured us by coming back again, my friend." Jude nodded. "And you don't seem to have done any great things for yourself by going away." Jude assented to this also. "Except found more mouths to fill." This came in a new voice, and Jude recognized its owner to be Uncle Joe, another mason whom he had known. Jude replied good-humouredly that he could not dispute it, and from remark to remark something like a general conversation arose between him and the crowd of idlers, during which Tinker Tailor asked Jude if he remembered the Apostles' Creed in Latin still, and the night of the challenge in the public house. "But fortune didn't lie that way," threw in Joe. "Your powers wasn't enough to carry you through." "Don't answer them any more," entreated Sue. "I don't think I like Christminster," murmured Little Time mournfully as he stood submerged and invisible in the crowd. But finding himself the centre of curiosity, quizzing and comment, Jude was not inclined to shrink from open declarations of what he had no great reason to be ashamed of, and in a little while was stimulated to say in a loud voice to the listening throng generally, "It is a difficult question, my friends, for any young man, that question I had to grapple with, and which thousands are weighing at the present moment in these uprising times, whether to follow uncritically the track he finds himself in without considering his aptness for it, or to consider what his aptness or bent may be and reshape his course accordingly. I tried to do the latter, and I failed. But I don't admit that my failure proved my view to be a wrong one, or that my success would have made it a right one, though that's how we appraise such attempts nowadays. I mean, not by their essential soundness, but by their accidental outcomes. If I had ended by becoming like one of these gentlemen in red and black that we saw dropping in here by now, everybody would have said, 'See how wise that young man was to follow the bent of his nature.' But having ended no better than I began, they say, 'See what a fool that fellow was in following a freak of his fancy.' However, it was my poverty and not my will that consented to be beaten. It takes 2 or 3 generations to do what I tried to do in one, and my impulses, affections, vices perhaps they should be called, were too strong not to hamper a man without advantages, who should be as cold-blooded as a fish and as selfish as a pig, to have a really good chance of being one of his country's worthies. You may ridicule me. I am quite willing that you should. I am a fit subject, no doubt. But I think if you knew what I have gone through these last few years, you would rather pity me. And if they knew," he nodded towards the college at which the dons were severally arriving, "it is just possible they would do the same." "He do look ill and worn out, it is true," said a woman. Sue's face grew more emotional, but though she stood close to Jude, she was screened. "I may do some good before I am dead, be a sort of success as a frightful example of what not to do, and so illustrate a moral story," continued Jude, beginning to grow bitter, though he had opened serenely enough. "I was, perhaps, after all, a paltry victim to the spirit of mental and social restlessness that makes so many unhappy in these days." "Don't tell them that," whispered Sue with tears at perceiving Jude's state of mind. "You weren't that. You struggled nobly to acquire knowledge, and only the meanest souls in the world would blame you." Jude shifted the child into a more easy position on his arm and concluded, "And what I appear, a sick and poor man, is not the worst of me. I am in a chaos of principles, groping in the dark, acting by instinct and not after example. 8 or 9 years ago, when I came here first, I had a neat stock of fixed opinions, but they dropped away one by one, and the further I get the less sure I am. I doubt if I have anything more for my present rule of life than following inclinations which do me and nobody else any harm, and actually give pleasure to those I love best. There, gentlemen, since you wanted to know how I was getting on, I have told you. Much good may it do you. I cannot explain further here. I perceive there is something wrong somewhere in our social formulas. What it is can only be discovered by men or women with greater insight than mine, if indeed they ever discover it, at least in our time. For who knoweth what is good for a man in this life, and who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? Hear, hear, said the populace. Well preached, said Tinker Tailor, and privately to his neighbours, why, one of them jobbing parsons swarming about here that takes the services when our head reverence want a holiday wouldn't have discoursed such doctrine for less than a guinea down, hey? I'll take my oath, not one of 'em would. And then he must have wrote it down for 'un. And this is only a working man. As a sort of objective commentary on Jude's remarks, there drove up at this moment, with a belated doctor, robed and panting, a cab whose horse failed to stop at the exact point required for setting down the hirer, who jumped out and entered the door. The driver, alighting, began to kick the animal in the belly. "If that can be done," said Jude, "at college gates in the most religious and educational city in the world, what shall we say as to how far we've got?" "Order!" said one of the policemen, who had been engaged with a comrade in opening the large doors opposite the college. "Keep your tongue quiet, my man, while the procession passes." The rain came on more heavily, and all who had umbrellas opened them. Jude was not one of these, and Sue only possessed a small one, half sunshade. She had grown pale, though Jude did not notice it then. "Let us go on, dear," she whispered, endeavouring to shelter him. "We haven't any lodgings yet, remember, and all our things are at the station, and you are by no means well yet. I'm afraid this wet will hurt you." "They are coming now. Just a moment and I'll go," said he. A peal of 6 bells struck out. Human faces began to crowd the windows around, and the procession of heads of houses and new doctors emerged, their red and black-gowned forms passing across the field of Jude's vision like inaccessible planets across an object-glass. As they went, their names were called by knowing informants, and when they reached the old round theatre of Wren, a cheer rose high. "Let's go that way," cried Jude, and though it now rained steadily, he seemed not to know it, and took them round to the theatre. Here they stood upon the straw that was laid to drown the discordant noise of wheels, where the quaint and frost-eaten stone busts encircling the building looked with pallid grimness on the proceedings, and in particular at the bedraggled Jude, Sue, and their children, as at ludicrous persons who had no business there. "I wish I could get in," he said to her fervidly. "Listen! I may catch a few words of the Latin speech by staying here. The windows are open." However, beyond the peals of the organ, and the shouts and hurrahs between each piece of oratory, Jude's standing in the wet did not bring him much Latin to his intelligence more than, now and then, a sonorous word in or ebus. "Well, I'm an outsider to the end of my days," he sighed after a while. "Now I'll go, my patient Sue. How good of you to wait in the rain all this time, to gratify my infatuation. I'll never care any more about the infernal cursed place, upon my soul I won't. And what made you tremble so when we were at the barrier? And how pale you are, Sue." "I saw Richard amongst the people on the other side." "Ah, did you?" "He is evidently come up to Jerusalem to see the festival like the rest of us, and on that account is probably living not so very far away. He had the same hankering for the university that you had in a milder form. I don't think he saw me, though he must have heard you speaking to the crowd, but he seemed not to notice." "Well, suppose he did. Your mind is free from worries about him now, my Sue?" "Yes, "I suppose so, but I am weak. Although I know it is all right with our plans, I felt a curious dread of him, an awe or terror of conventions I don't believe in. It comes over me at times like a sort of creeping paralysis and makes me so sad." "You are getting tired, Sue." "Oh, I forgot, darling. Yes, we'll go on at once." They started in quest of the lodging, and at last found something that seemed to promise well in Mildew Lane, a spot which to Jude was irresistible, though to Sue it was not so fascinating, a narrow lane close to the back of a college, but having no communication with it. The little houses were darkened to gloom by the high collegiate buildings, within which life was so far removed from that of the people in the lane as if it had been on opposite sides of the globe, yet only a thickness of wall divided them. 2 or 3 of the houses had notices of rooms to let, and the newcomers knocked at the door of one, which a woman opened. "Ah, listen," said Jude suddenly, instead of addressing her. "What?" "Why, the bells. What church can that be? The tones are familiar." Another peal of bells had begun to sound out at some distance off. "I don't know," said the landlady tartly. "Did you knock to ask that?" "No, for lodgings," said Jude, coming to himself. The householder scrutinized Sue's figure a moment. "We haven't any to let," said she, shutting the door. Jude looked discomfited, and the boy distressed. "Now, Jude," said Sue, "let me try. You don't know the way." They found a second place hard by, but here the occupier, observing not only Sue, but the boy and the small children, said civilly, "I am sorry to say we don't let where there are children," and also closed the door. The small child squared its mouth and cried silently, with an instinct that trouble loomed. The boy sighed. "I don't like Christminster," he said. "Are the great old houses jails?" "No, colleges," said Jude, "which perhaps you'll study in some day." "I'd rather not," the boy rejoined. "Now we'll try again," said Sue. "I'll pull my cloak more round me. Leaving Kennetbridge for this place is like coming from Caiaphas to Pilate. How do I look now, dear?" "Nobody would notice now," said Jude. There was one other house, and they tried a third time. The woman here was more amiable, but she had little room to spare, and could only agree to take in Sue and the children if her husband could go elsewhere.